In the last episode, we witnessed the start of the legendary Genpei War in 1180, as the ambition of the relentless Taira no Kiyomori plunged Japan into chaos. Through Kiyomori, the Taira had come to dominate the capital, and soon enough the very imperial throne itself, as with his great influence he was able to establish his grandson, Antoku, as the new emperor. This was the move which finally lit the spark, causing an uprising across the land, and which saw the resurgence of the previously defeated Minamoto, who arose to challenge the reach of the Taira. Now, with the death of Kiyomori in 1181, and with Japan fractured between competing warrior houses, we will witness the final chapter of this struggle. Minamoto no Yoritomo is set to rise, yet we will soon see it is not just the Taira, but also opposing branches of his own family who will stand in his way. By early 1183, the Genpei War, which had gripped Japan over the last several years, was on hiatus. Strategic difficulties and perhaps more importantly, a famine, had led to each side being unable to physically march their forces on campaign against the other. But certainly, there were signals of changing times. Despite the Taira victories in the battles of Tsunomatagawa and Yahagigawa, the prior death of the great Taira no Kiyomori in 1181 would leave a void within the Taira that would never be refilled. All while Minamoto no Yoritomo continued to muster his forces and cement his position in Kamakura, establishing a powerful government there which soon came to rival that of what influence the Taira held onto in the capital. If anything, the lull in the conflict, which primarily extended over 1182, merely showcased the changing balance of power. If the Taira were to have any chance of maintaining their status and pushing east against the Minamoto, they would need to plan their next military campaign carefully. Now, as we have previously established, the Genpei War was not a simple conflict between Taira and Minamoto, but instead one of various sides of each family, all competing for influence. Yoritomo welcomed the support of any warrior, no matter their family, so long as they pledged to support him. But he was also at odds with other members of the Minamoto, with the greatest example being his cousin, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, also known as Kiso Yoshinaka. There had emerged a growing tension between the two, not just through various rumors which had reached Yoritomo's ears regarding Yoshinaka's intentions, but perhaps more so simply due to the nature of Yoshinaka's rising power. As we discussed in the prior episode, Yoshinaka had come to command a vast swath of territory throughout Shinano province and into the Hokuriku. He was a direct threat to Yoritomo's own power base, yet for a time, it remained unclear whether his aims rested with taking the fight to the Taira or turning on Yoritomo to assert himself as the true leader of the family. The answer came in the spring of 1183, when Yoshinaka finally pledged himself to Yoritomo, perhaps believing that the Minamoto were stronger together and that it was in their best interest to unite to bring down the Taira. In retrospect, we can likely view this as a scheme by Yoshinaka to perhaps simply remove the tension between himself and his cousin so that he could more efficiently focus on his own westward ambition. Regardless, he would pay for this ruse with his own son, Yoshitaka, whom he would send to Kamakura as a political hostage. Later, the boy would even become engaged to Yoritomo's own daughter, Ohime. Now it was only a matter of time to see who would make the next move, as whichever side initiated would surely bring about a chain of events that would seal the fate of the nation. In the end, it would be the Taira who would take the initiative, as by early 1183, finally able to muster an effective army, Taira no Korimori led a new campaign to subjugate the fertile Hokuriku, taking it from Yoshinaka. The first significant engagement would be at the Siege of Hyuchi, where the Taira forces met minimal Minamoto resistance and laid siege to Hyuchi Castle for several months before it finally fell. The Taira then pressed deeper into the region. Yet this time, however, Yoshinaka had planned a trap for Korimori's army. In the early summer, as the Taira advanced into Echu province, the Minamoto would strike them at the Kurikara Pass. This is the battle which can be perhaps viewed as the main turning point in the war, as despite his inferior numbers, Yoshinaka would deliver a masterstroke. Splitting his forces in two, Yoshinaka's plan was to attack the Taira from the front and rear under the cover of night, catching the Taira off guard and scattering them with shock and terror. This battle is described as such in the Heike Monogatari. As night descended from the north and south, a pair of flanking forces converged, 10,000 men in all, to meet near the Kurikara chapel, and there they raised a great battle cry. The Heike saw flying behind them what seemed a cloud of white banners. "This mountain, though, on all sides is nothing but boulders and escarpments," they protested amongst themselves. "Who could possibly have imagined a flanking force getting behind us?" Then, at Yoshinaka's command, a great battle cry rose from his main corps, from 10,000 riders hidden at Matsunaga no Yanagibara, and from Guminoki Bayashi, and from Imai Kanehira's 6,000 lurking at Hinomiya Bayashi. Behind the Heike and before them, 40,000 full-throated shouts all but shattered mountains and rivers. As Yoshinaka had foreseen, the Heike, with night now coming on and the enemy threatening them front and rear, faltered and broke. "Shame! For shame! Turn back! Turn back!" many Heike cried, but most fled, deaf to any reproach or appeal, headlong down Kurikara ravine. No one could see his fellows ahead. All simply clung to a desperate faith that the bottom would offer a road. Down hurtled the father, down the son, down the brothers, elder then younger, down the lord, his retainers behind him, men piling on horses, horses on men, over and over, till mounts and riders, 70,000 of the Heike, edge to edge, choked the yawning ravine. Springs ran blood, the dead lay in mounds. To this day, so it is told, arrow strike nicks and sword cuts mark the rocks up and down Kurikara. Now, although details in this telling, such as the numbers used, are very apparent exaggerations, what this telling does offer is the image of the great Minamoto victory, one which would send the Taira shattered and fleeing back to Kyoto, as Yoshinaka now stood poised to enter as the great hero of the hour. Yoshinaka had now delivered a more crippling defeat to the Taira than anything Yoritomo had done up until this point, and now, with the Taira weakened, the road was clear for Yoshinaka to march his own army west to the capital. The Taira attempted to rally the monks of Mount Hiei to lend their militant support in the defense of Kyoto from Yoshinaka's invasion, but were soundly refused. In fact, stories say that the influential retired emperor Go-Shirakawa even fled to Mount Hiei as to avoid being taken west by the Taira. In the end, the monks of Enryakuji atop Mount Hiei would instead support Yoshinaka, as his forces flooded into the capital unopposed. The Minamoto had seized Kyoto, but it was somewhat of an empty victory despite the influence that came with it, as the Taira, knowing they were unable to hold out against Yoshinaka at this time, had completely vacated the imperial city, taking with them the child emperor Antoku and the imperial regalia. They would flee to the safety of Kyushu, where they would attempt to rebuild their numbers and prepare for a counterattack. Yet now, with the Taira out of Kyoto, despite the absence of the current emperor, the once powerful Go-Shirakawa was able to reassert himself atop the imperial court. Go-Shirakawa was wise to know which of the Minamoto lords was truly greater, as although it had been Yoshinaka whom he had to thank for driving the Taira out and restoring his power, Yoritomo still appeared the stronger and more legitimate of the two. Thus, Goshirakawa began making efforts to award and ally himself to Yoritomo, all to the dismay of Yoshinaka, who must have been enraged that his efforts were not being nearly as celebrated. Goshirakawa would even place another one of his grandsons, the child Gotoba, on the imperial throne. Gotoba was the younger half-brother of the Taira Emperor Antoku, who had been taken west. History remembers this period as a time of overlap between two emperors, as Antoku still possessed the imperial regalia, thus his legitimacy still remained despite his relocation from the capital. Regardless, this move by Goshirakawa to support Gotoba was yet another slap in the face to Yoshinaka, whom for some time had been supporting the son of the deceased Prince Mochihito, who had died at the start of the war. Yoshinaka had hoped that Mochihito's son, who is often called Prince Hokuriku, would instead be next in line to the throne. However, Goshirakawa had other plans. Deep and bitter resentment started to brew between the two, as Goshirakawa continued to disregard Yoshinaka. What is also said not to have helped were Yoshinaka's crude country manners, which alienated him from the refined and sophisticated behaviors of the nobility in the capital. This caused a natural growing resentment of him. There was also anger that may have been perhaps directed at Yoshinaka, which he was not totally responsible for, as his invasion had thrown the city and surrounding area into chaos and unrest, all of which his own army was unable to quell, in large thanks to the continued food shortage which had left its mark on the region. The supply shortage then even began to affect his own army, which caused continued trouble as portions of his forces began to revolt and cause havoc. The situation in Kyoto was truly becoming a mess. Back in the west, however, the Taira would eventually relocate from Kyushu to Shikoku, where they amassed greater support and established a power base at a place called Yashima. Wishing to regain some semblance of influence and authority, by late 1183, Yoshinaka made plans to deal with the Taira, moving his forces west to Bichu province, where they would prepare to cross the inland sea. Yet the Taira, anticipating Yoshinaka's assault, this time struck first, in a stunning reversal of Yoshinaka's earlier victory at Kurikara. This time, the Taira would attack the encamped Minamoto army near Mizushima, using their ships to bring warriors directly into the fray. As the Heike Monogatari describes the battle, the Heike, in 1,000 boats, stormed in to attack. They roped the 1,000 boats, bow, stern, and amidships together, laid planks all the way across them, and so made their fleet one deck. Both sides uttered war cries, traded arrows, drove their boats together in a ferocious clash. Those more distant wielded bows, those nearer slashed away with swords. Some fell afoul of grappling hooks, others grappling hooked their man. Some pairs, struggling hand to hand, plunged into the sea. Some died run through by each other's blades. Every man fought as he pleased. The Genji deputy commander, Uno Yukihiro, was slain. The sight moved Yata Yoshikyo, commander of the Genji force, to run a boat, he and 6 men, out into the thick of the fray. But some mishap occurred. The boat sank, and they all died. The Heike who had brought on board saddled horses reached the shore, disembarked the horses, mounted, and with fearful war cries charged. Undone by their commander's loss, the Genji all fled for their lives. Mizushima cleaned the Heike of the shame from old defeats. It was an utter disaster for Yoshinaka that he would never recover from. By this point, Goshirakawa was actively working with Yoritomo to remove Yoshinaka from the capital, eventually resulting in Yoritomo finally agreeing to send armies westward under the command of his brothers, Minamoto no Noriyori and Minamoto no Yoshitsune, who, as we will come to see, will emerge as the great hero of the war. Yoshinaka's power in Kyoto was in complete shambles. He was even deserted by his loyal comrade, Minamoto no Yukiye. In face of the impending attack on him by Yoritomo's forces, Yoshinaka took drastic measures, kidnapping Goshirakawa and forcing him to issue an official decree of war against Yoritomo. It is even said he would name himself as Seito Taishogun, a position similar yet still different from that of the more iconic Sei Taishogun. None of this, though, would save him. By early 1184, Yoritomo's forces were upon him, crushing any resistance Yoshinaka put forth in defense of Kyoto. Seeing the situation was hopeless, Yoshinaka would attempt to flee, eventually making his last stand at Owazu, where Yoshinaka would be struck by an arrow in his head, killing him and ending his tyranny. Upon seeing this, one of his last loyal commanders, Imai Kanehira, defiantly shouted, "Well then, I have no one left to protect. Watch me now, gentlemen from the east. Learn from the greatest brave in Japan how a warrior ends his life." He then placed the tip of his sword between his teeth and leapt from his horse while at full gallop, the impact ending his life in stunning fashion. Yoritomo had now come into possession of Kyoto, despite himself still being hundreds of kilometers away in Kamakura, and thus we enter into the final leg of the war, as Yoritomo's generals would deliver unto him his ultimate triumph. As I mentioned, there would be no greater hero than that of Minamoto no Yoshitsune, who, along with his valiant companion, the mighty warrior monk Saito Musashibo Benkei, would lead the Minamoto armies to victory. Although the Taira had successfully rallied their forces again, they would never prove to be enough of a match to defeat Yoshitsune in the field. Roughly a month after the death of Yoshinaka, the Taira would make a concentrated effort to retake Kyoto, seizing on the potential weakness of the Minamoto caused by their infighting. They had come as far as Fukuhara, nearing the capital, and had a well-established position with a sizable force. The Minamoto, however, with Yoshitsune and Noriyori leading two contingents of forces in a pincer attack on the Taira, were able to pull off an astonishing victory in what would come to be the Battle of Ichinotani, with one of its most storied moments being Yoshitsune's charge down the Hyorori-goe track, a perilous mountain path that the Taira did not expect an attack to come from. With the Minamoto swarming the Taira defenses from multiple sides, and with a number of significant Taira commanders being slain in the heat of battle, the clash soon devolved into a mass rout. The Taira were defeated and scattered once more. Had Yoshitsune been able to carry the momentum forward, chasing the Taira back west, the war may have concluded sooner. Yet it is here we can examine a growing rift forming between Yoritomo and Yoshitsune. Yoshitsune was now a rising star, much like Yoshinaka had once been. And now, a deepening paranoia had begun to brew within Yoritomo about who else might come about to threaten his regime. Because of Yoritomo's growing weariness to Yoshitsune, he would be ordered to stay back in Kyoto while other commanders led the campaigns. Notably, Minamoto no Noriyori was allowed to continue on, pushing deep into the west into what would become quite the slow and arduous campaign. If victory was to come against the Taira, it was to be a lengthy process. Eventually, by early 1185, Yoshitsune had had enough of waiting and petitioned Go-Shirakawa to be allowed to embark on a campaign against the Taira stronghold at Yashima. Yet still, interference from Yoritomo nearly threatened to undo the entire operation, as Yoshitsune, who was about ready to set sail, was ordered to return to the capital in exchange for the Yoritomo loyalist Kajiwara Kagetoki, who was to instead lead the attack. Kagetoki, though, was not convinced of the plan and believed it to be too risky an endeavor. This eventually resulted in Yoshitsune accusing him of cowardice and going through with the plan anyway. Taking only a small yet dedicated force of 150 men, Yoshitsune crossed the sea on 5 ships, where they landed in Shikoku and began to take the Taira by surprise. Caught completely off guard, the Taira were unable to effectively deal with Yoshitsune's minuscule yet elusive force, which began to seize villages and cause havoc, all while working their way toward the Taira base at Yashima. They burned everything in their path, causing tremendous chaos, and eventually Yashima itself was set ablaze, causing the Taira family and garrison present to board ships and take refuge nearby. It was yet another great triumph for Yoshitsune, one far greater than the last. And most detrimental of all for his relationship with Yoritomo, it continued to grow his legend. Warrior families across Shikoku were quick to abandon the Taira in favor of the increasingly superior Minamoto. And with Noriyori's campaign in the west working to cut off the Taira's path at withdrawal, the remaining Taira forces, including the family head Taira no Munemori and the child Emperor Antoku, were ultimately left with one option: make a last desperate stand at sea. It is here, roughly a month after the destruction of Yashima, we come to the great finale of the war, fought at the Shimonoseki Strait, which separates Honshu from Kyushu. This would be the legendary Battle of Dan no Ura, one of the most storied battles in all of Japanese history. Although the Taira had long held dominance of the sea with their large navy and good knowledge of the waves, the influx of Minamoto's support meant they now had more ships with which to bring against the Taira. Still, if the Taira could hold to a solid defensive formation and rely on the currents, they might have been able to still pull off a stunning triumph for the ages. It does not appear to be completely known how many ships were present on both sides, yet modern estimates put the Minamoto number at around 700, while the Taira had perhaps as many as 500. As battle was joined, it initially appeared that the Taira had taken the upper hand, as arrows riddled ships and boarding parties clashed. The initial sway of the currents was also working in the Taira favor, throwing the Minamoto into a disadvantage. Yet the Taira were not to benefit for long. Soon the tide started to shift, and perhaps most significantly, the Taira general Taguchi Shigeyoshi switched sides to support the Minamoto, revealing to Yoshitsune crucial intel about the Taira formation and the location of the child Emperor Antoku, who was aboard one of the ships. The Minamoto then launched a vicious spearhead, tearing through the Taira lines and towards the Emperor's vessel. All was quickly falling apart for the Taira, and they began to realize their fate. Now came the Genji warriors, pouring onto the Heike vessels, slaughtering with arrows and sword every crewman, every helmsman, leaving not one to row or steer. Their bodies lay littered underfoot. For some time, Lady Ni had expected what she saw now. She threw her 2 gray nun's robes over her head, lifted high her beaten silk trouser skirts, clasped the sacred jewel to her side, thrust the treasure sword into her sash, and lifted the Emperor into her arms. "All those loyal to your sovereign, follow me!" She stepped to the side of the boat. His Majesty, in his 8th year, was thoroughly grown up for his age, and his beauty shone around him. His rich black hair hung below his waist. "Where are you taking me, grandmother?" he asked with wonder in his eyes. "You still do not know, your Majesty? Your virtuous karma from past lives made you sovereign over the realm, but now the influence of some evil has brought your grandeur to an end. First, your Majesty, if you please, face east and say goodbye to the grand shrine of Ise. Then, trusting Amida to welcome you into his western paradise, face west and call his name. This land of ours, a few millet grains scattered in remote seas, is not a nice place. I am taking you now to a much happier one, the pure land of bliss." So she addressed him, weeping. Robed in dove gray, his hair in side loops like any boy's, cheeks streaming with tears, he pressed his dear little hands together, prostrated himself towards the east, and bade farewell to the Ise shrine, then turned to the west, calling the name. Lady Ni said, her arms around him, "Down there, far beneath the waves, another capital awaits us," and plunged into the fathomless deep. Upon seeing this, many Taira warriors joined her and the Emperor, realizing their age had ended, and leapt in to drown themselves in the water below. The Battle of Dan no Ura ended with the utter destruction of the Taira, and the final great victory for Yoshitsune. The Genpei War was over. The Minamoto had won a total triumph. And although many of the Taira warriors, including the valiant Tomomori, died that day, the family head, Taira no Munemori, opted to instead be captured by Minamoto forces, yet he would very soon after be executed. In the ashes of the war, a new order had arisen in the east. a warrior government unlike anything that had come before, led by Minamoto no Yoritomo. The Heian period, a time in which power rested wholly in Kyoto, was at an end, as now the Kamakura period was at hand. Yet although Yoritomo had won, he had done so at a distance, as his brother Minamoto no Yoshitsune had truly become the great hero of the war. Certainly, all power rested in Yoritomo's hands, with which he now had the ability to reforge the country. Yet how he was to proceed now would be imperative. How would he firmly establish his new regime across the land? How would he ensure its lasting stability and survival? How would he deal with rumors and treachery? In the next episode, we will explore the rise of the Kamakura shogunate, as Yoritomo claims the title of Sei Taishogun, ushering in a new age of samurai rule in the wake of the Genpei War. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.